Welcome, everyone, to our fun little study group for PP 5340 Introduction to Public Policy and Management.
Great to be diving in.
Today, we're tackling the readings from Section 03. That's Administrative Responsibility, Policy Development, Accountability, and Implementation. Quite a mouthful.
It really is. A lot of ground to cover there.
We've got a fantastic stack of sources for our deep dive today, exploring, the really complex world of how public agencies operate.
And crucially, how we as citizens actually hold them to account. That's the key part.
Exactly. We'll be navigating through some foundational ideas, really digging into that tricky balance between, let's say, rigid rules and necessary judgment.
Yeah, that discretion piece. Always complicated.
And we'll look at real-world examples that highlight just how challenging this can be in practice. It's not just theory.
Definitely not.
So, to guide our conversation, we'll be drawing pretty extensively from public management, a three-dimensional approach, which honestly gives us a fantastic overview of accountability, its structures, culture, craft.
A really useful framework, that one.
Then we'll contrast some, long-standing debates with excerpts from Public Policy and the Nature of Administrative Responsibility by Hermann Feiner and Carl Joachim Friedrich.
The classic Feiner-Friedrich debate. Their differing views from the, 30s and 40s still echo today.
They really do. We'll also look at a fascinating contemporary study, Policy Implementation, Street-Level Bureaucracy, and the Importance of Discretion by Lars Tummers and Victor Bekkers.
Right, that brings a more modern empirical lens, looking at the folks on the ground.
Exactly. And for a peek into specific legal applications, we have excerpts from Unleashing the Prosecutor's Discretion, United States v. Goodwin by Sharon A. Cummings.
Prosecutorial discretion. High stakes there.
Very. And The Origins of the Elected Prosecutor by Michael J. Ellis, both from legal journals, really showing discretion in action.
And how that unique American system came about.
Our mission today for you is to extract the most important nuggets from these materials. Think of this as your shortcut, maybe.
Yeah, your guide to being genuinely well-informed on all this responsibility, policy development, accountability, implementation.
Giving you those aha moments without, hopefully, the information overload.
We'll try.
So let's jump right in and cut through the complexity to understand how responsibility and accountability truly work in public administration. Okay, so let's unpack this right from the start. When we toss around words like accountability and responsibility in public administration, what exactly do those words mean?
It's a fair question. They get used interchangeably all the time.
Right. But our sources show there are crucial distinctions. And overlooking them, that can lead to real problems in how we expect government to function, how we hold it to account.
Absolutely. Getting the definitions clear is step one.
So our core text, Public Management, a three-dimensional approach, introduces accountability as, and I like this phrase, one of the oldest but most elusive issues in the field of public management.
Elusive. That says a lot, doesn't it? Like trying to grab smoke sometimes?
It does. It tells us accountability is fundamentally about one actor holding another accountable. Simple enough on the surface.
But then it gets complex.
Because it spans three critical dimensions: structure, culture, and craft. They immediately tells us it's not just about rules written down somewhere.
No, it's much deeper. It's baked into how organizations actually behave, the values they foster, the norms.
And how individuals make decisions on the job. So the key insight here seems to be that effective accountability can't just be, legislated.
Right. You can't just pass a law and say be accountable. It needs to be understood in its full context. Formal rules, informal norms, individual judgment. All three legs of the stool.
Then we have Hermann Feiner from his classic piece, Public Policy and the Nature of Administrative Responsibility. He dives into responsibility specifically and presents two core definitions that really highlight a deep historical tension.
Feiner's definitions are foundational, really.
His first one implies a clear external authority, an agency or person having power over another, defining their obligations, and importantly, the consequences for failure.
This leans heavily towards external control, doesn't it? Where errors are met with, what did he say, public execution? Bit dramatic, maybe?
A bit, but it gets the point across. It's about clear lines of command, clear rules, clear and often harsh consequences, like a very strict boss with a very thick rule book.
Got it. Top-down, external enforcement.
But his second definition is quite different and arguably more complex. It emphasizes the agent's conscience, the internal dimension.
Exactly. Here, an error is only truly an error when recognized by the agent's own conscience. Punishment, merely twinges thereof, or, as Feiner provocatively calls it, Harakiri.
So highlighting a much more internal moral dimension to responsibility, a personal ethical compass, a self-imposed sense of duty.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how these two definitions from Feiner, even decades later, immediately set up this inherent tension, one we still grapple with today in, well, every part of government. Absolutely. Do we rely primarily on external enforcement rules, laws, sanctions, Feiner's public execution, or do we place primary reliance on an internal moral compass, the individual sense of duty, ethics, the harakiri?
It's a debate that plays out everywhere, every day.
And our public management text reinforces this with Mosher's distinction, right, between objective responsibility
Which emphasizes those structural, formal aspects.
and subjective responsibility, reflecting the cultural dimension, those internal values and norms.
John Millett argued back in '54, didn't he, that good management sort of abhors the idea of arbitrary authority and recognizes the reality of external direction and constraint.
Exactly. It suggests a constant push and pull. It's not one or the other, usually. The core insight is that responsibility isn't just one thing, it's this dynamic tension.
So what does this all mean for you listening? It means grappling with this idea that, yeah, we want government to be effective, to get things done.
But we also want it to be answerable. Answerable to the public, to laws, to high ethical standards.
Wallace Sayre, quoted in Public Management, talked about reconciling the great unprecedented growth of administrative power with democratic government.
And that's still the core challenge, isn't it? How do you empower agencies to solve complex problems without creating unchecked power?
It really is. This foundational understanding is crucial because, well, without it, any discussion of accountability is just built on shifting sand.
You need both, the rule book and the moral compass.
Now, you might be wondering, how did we get to this point where accountability is such a complex, elusive issue?
It wasn't always this complicated, right?
No, not at all. The very structure of government has changed so dramatically over time, especially in the U.S.
Things were simpler, in a way.
Well, our public management text traces this evolution in America from like 1789, the early days, right up to the progressive era.
Perfect.
In that largely pre-bureaucratic America, accountability was described as direct, personal, and rather haphazard.
Haphazard, huh?
Yeah. Think about it. Without massive, complex agencies, legislatures could specify minute detail in contracts with individual administrative agents. It was more direct, almost personal.
You knew who was doing what, presumably.
Maybe. Elected officials often functioned quite independently, though they were beholden mostly to political parties through the spoils system.
Yes, patronage, loyalty over expertise, often.
Right. Oversight was intermittent, legislators, parties, courts, but it wasn't the continuous, layered system we have now.
A very different world.
Then came the progressive era, late 19th, early 20th century, and with it, rapid government growth.
A response to huge societal changes, right?
Yeah.
Industrialization, cities growing.
Exactly. New needs. Public health, education, infrastructure. And this era saw a dramatic increase in administrative discretion.
Because government agencies took on more specialized, complex tasks. Things legislators just couldn't micromanage anymore.
Can you imagine Congress trying to regulate every detail of food safety today? Impossible.
Utterly. So discretion became necessary.
And our text highlights reforms from this time, like the city manager form of government.
Designed to professionalize services, separate politics from administration, at least in theory.
Right, aiming for less political and corruptible and more professional and bureaucratic accountability. Moving towards merit, away from spoils.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, that shift from direct, simple relationships to these complex bureaucracies absolutely necessitated new forms of accountability.
The old ways just didn't work anymore.
No, the old doctrines of direct popular control were just inadequate. Woodrow Wilson's famous 1887 essay, The Study of Administration.
Often cited for the politics-administration dichotomy.
Right, but it made a more profound observation, noted in Public Management. There be no danger in power, if only it be not irresponsible.
Power itself isn't the problem, irresponsibility is.
Precisely. It was a recognition that the founders' doctrines just weren't enough for the accountability issues raised by all this new administrative discretion.
New circumstances needed new doctrines.
Exactly. The core insight here is that as government grew, the challenge of controlling it didn't vanish. It just transformed. It demanded new mechanisms, new ways of thinking about holding power accountable in a democracy.
Okay, so to help us navigate this intricate landscape, scholars have developed frameworks. Think of them like maps.
Handy ways to categorize things, make sense of the complexity.
And one particularly useful one comes from Barbara Romschek and Melvin Dobnik. They propose 4 distinct types of accountability systems.
Based on 2 key dimensions, right?
Yeah, first, the source of control, is it internal or external to the organization? And second, the degree of control, high or low.
Okay, internal, external, high-low control. That gives you a matrix.
Exactly. Our public management text lays it out very clearly. First type, bureaucratic or hierarchical accountability.
Okay, bureaucratic. Sounds like rules and bosses.
Pretty much. It's internal high control. Think of the hierarchy manager overseeing a team, clear rules, standard operating procedures, strict expectations.
That links back to Musher's objective responsibility, the formal structures, following the chain of command.
Right. Ensuring consistency, adherence to internal rules. Okay, second, legal accountability.
Legal, so laws, courts, statutes.
Exactly. This is external, high control. It's about formal or implied agreements between an agency and its legal overseers, Congress overseeing an agency, courts reviewing decisions.
Ensuring compliance with statutes, regulations, the Constitution.
Yeah.
The control comes from outside the agency itself, from the legal system.
Third type, professional accountability.
Professionals, so like doctors, lawyers, engineers.
Yeah. This type is internal, but with low formal control. Accountability here relies heavily on the expertise, ethical standards, and discretion of the professionals within the organization.
Deferring to their specialized knowledge and judgment. This aligns more with Mosher's subjective responsibility, the cultural dimension, internal norms, professional ethics guiding behavior.
Right, rather than just explicit rules. And finally, fourth, political accountability.
Political sounds like voters, elected officials, interest groups.
That's it. This is external, with low control. It emphasizes responsiveness of managers or organizations to their constituency, the public, elected officials, agency clients, interest groups.
The expectation is responsiveness to policy priorities, public sentiment, political direction, being attuned.
So what's truly illuminating here, and the text points this out, is that these types rarely exist in isolation.
No, they often impose what Romschek and Dubnik call cross pressures on public managers.
Cross pressures. Explain that.
Well, imagine a manager implementing, say, a new community safety policy. They might face bureaucratic demands for efficiency and procedure, hierarchical.
Okay.
Legal mandates for civil rights compliance, legal.
Makes sense.
Professional expectations for ethical policing, professional.
Right?
And political pressures for visible results. And community engagement, political.
Pulling them in different directions, creating these accountability dilemmas.
Exactly. The key insight is that accountability in public service is rarely simple. It's a dynamic juggling act. How managers choose to prioritize and balance these competing demands fundamentally determines how accountable they truly are in practice.
Now, building on that, political scientist Judith E. Gruber, referenced in Public Management, developed a framework specifically for the challenges of accountability in democracies.
Why the special focus on democracies? What's different?
Well, our text explains it very clearly. Unaccountable power flies in the face of the central norms of such political systems.
If government legitimacy comes from the consent of the governed.
Right, then an inability to control the governmental apparatus, the bureaucracy, it challenges the fundamental nature of that government. It's almost an existential threat to the democratic ideal.
If the people can't control their government, then who can? That's the core tension.
So Gruber focuses on 2 critical dimensions of bureaucratic behavior that can be held accountable. First, the procedures they use, are they fair, transparent, consistent?
How they do things.
And second, the substance of the decisions they make, are those decisions in line with public interest and democratic mandates?
Will they actually decide?
And based on these dimensions, public management outlines 4 idealized types of bureaucratic actors. Another helpful categorization, like archetypes.
All right, let's hear them.
An autonomous actor has low procedural constraint and low substantive constraint. Control here is ideally through self-control, relying heavily on internal ethics, professional judgment. Think of an independent expert.
What's freedom there?
Then an end achiever. Low procedural constraint, but high substantive constraint. Control is through their pursuit of the public interest. Flexibility on how, but strictness on what they achieve. Results matter most.
Get the job done. Less focus on the process.
Third, a procedure follower. High procedural constraint, low substantive constraint. Control is through participation, adherence to process. Fairness and transparency in how decisions are made is key, even if the outcome isn't tightly predefined.
Following the rules carefully, the process is paramount.
And finally, a clerk. High procedural and high substantive constraint, operating within very tight parameters, basically executing predefined tasks with minimal discretion. Follow the rule book precisely.
Very little wiggle room.
So this raises an important question for you, the listener. How do we ensure these bureaucrats, with their specialized knowledge and varying autonomy, are still acting in the public's interest?
Following democratic mandates.
Exactly. The core insight from these frameworks, Romsek and Dubnik-Gruber, is that accountability isn't one size fits all.
No, definitely not.
These frameworks help us identify the specific challenges and potential solutions for each type of actor and control mechanism, whether from inside or outside the organization.
They highlight that just telling someone to be accountable isn't enough. You need to understand the kind of accountability sought, the behaviors you want to control, the context.
It shifts the conversation from just a general expectation to a more nuanced analysis of how control actually works in a complex democracy. Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, where the rubber meets the road in public administration. Discretion.
Ah, yes. Discretion. The freedom to make choices.
It's unavoidable, right, and often necessary. Officials, from policymakers setting broad goals to frontline workers dealing with individual citizens, they often need flexibility.
To make decisions in complex, unique situations that rigid rules just can't anticipate.
Exactly. But, and this is the crucial part our sources highlight, this necessary discretion also opens the door to potential problems.
From inconsistent policy application to, well, outright abuse of power. It's truly a double-edged sword.
Hermann Fiener, back in his critique of Friedrich, touched on this. He noted Friedrich's suggestion that officials need elasticity, discretion, and inner check, relying on moral responsibility.
Friedrich believed in giving administrators latitude, trusting their expertise and conscience.
But Fiener, ever the skeptic, he kind of poo-poos the efficacy of relying just on that internal stuff. He worried that relying solely on an official's conscience might be like reliance on an official's accomplice.
Strong words. He feared experts might use their knowledge to justify irresponsibility.
Yeah, leading to conceit of themselves and scorn of the popular will. He was worried about expertise becoming a shield for unaccountability, unchecked power, basically.
A classic tension. Expertise versus democratic control.
Which leads us nicely to a more contemporary look at discretion, specifically at the street level.
Of frontline workers.
Right. The study Policy Implementation, Street-Level Bureaucracy, and the Importance of Discretion by Tummers and Bekkers, they focus on those street-level bureaucrats, teachers, police officers, social workers, mental health pros.
The actual face of government for many citizens. Their daily decisions have huge impacts.
Absolutely. Their study, done with mental health professionals implementing a new policy, investigates two important positive effects of discretion.
Okay, so discretion isn't just risky, it can be good too.
Exactly. First, increase client meaningfulness. Their hypothesis suggests that when street-level bureaucrats have more discretion, it positively influences how meaningful they find their interactions with clients.
Makes sense. Like a teacher adapting methods for a specific student, seeing it work.
Precisely. That ability to customize and see the direct impact makes the work feel more meaningful, more purposeful to the bureaucrat.
Okay, so meaningfulness. What's a second positive effect?
Second, increased willingness to implement. They suggest a direct link between discretion and the bureaucrat's willingness to actually implement the policy.
Rooted in theories about autonomy fostering motivation, like self-determination theory.
Exactly. When people feel they have some control over their work, they're more engaged, more motivated to carry out the policy effectively.
And wasn't there a third hypothesis? A mediation effect.
Yes, good point. A mediation effect. They suggest discretion boosts client meaningfulness, which in turn boosts willingness to implement.
So it's a loop. Discretion helps them feel like they're making a difference, which then makes them more willing to do the work.
Right. Bureaucrats want to make a difference. Seeing their work help clients, enabled by discretion, motivates them.
What's truly compelling here is this contrast. Discretion is clearly necessary for tailoring services, for motivation, but it also creates that challenge for external control, for consistency. If officials are too autonomous, how do we ensure they're following the public will? Fiener's critique echoes here.
The potential for abuse.
Right. But the Tummers and Bekkers study gives crucial empirical evidence. It shows the intrinsic value bureaucrats place on discretion itself, not just its effects on clients. It directly influences their willingness.
So the core insight.
For policy to be delivered effectively, humanely, discretion is essential. But that essential flexibility creates a constant tension with the need for fairness, consistency, democratic accountability. It's a fundamental dilemma.
How to empower frontline workers without losing sight of the big picture. Okay, let's apply this idea of discretion to a very specific high-stakes context, where the personal stakes are huge. The criminal justice system.
And prosecutors, specifically, they hold immense power.
Immense. Deciding who gets charged, for what, how severely. These aren't always dictated by rigid rules. There's significant discretion involved.
A lot of judgment calls.
Sharon A. Cummings, in her analysis, Unleashing the Prosecutor's Discretion, United States v. Goodwin, notes that prosecutorial charging discretion is accorded considerable deference in the U.S. system.
Well, largely because cases are complex, lots of info, limited resources. They have to prioritize.
Right. But, she clarifies, using that discretion to enhance charges against a defendant in retaliation for them exercising a constitutional right, like appealing or requesting a jury trial that violates due process.
Can't punish someone for using their rights. Cases like North Carolina v. Pierce and Blackledge v. Perry establish that principle.
Exactly. Cummings then details the pivotal case, United States v. Goodwin from 1982.
What happened in Goodwin?
The Supreme Court faced a situation where a prosecutor increased charges pre-trial after the defendant rejected a plea bargain and asked for a jury trial.
Okay, so the defendant exercises a right, charges go up. Seems problematic.
You'd think. But the critical finding was that this pretrial increase did not automatically warrant a presumption of vindictiveness.
Really? Why not?
The court reasoned that a prosecutor's assessment of a case might not have fully crystallized before trial. New info could emerge, or they might just repraise the existing evidence, justifying increased charges.
Ah, so they drew a distinction between pretrial and post-trial increases.
Exactly. Post-trial increases were seen as more likely to be improperly motivated, because by then the investigation should be complete, the trial result known. Pretrial was seen as more fluid.
That raises a really important question for you, the listener. How do we ensure fairness when so much power rests with individual discretion, especially when the timing of charges can influence the perception of vindictiveness?
Was there dissent in Goodwin?
Oh, yes. The dissent argued strongly against that distinction. They believed the question should always be about the realistic likelihood of vindictiveness, regardless of when charges were increased.
Their concern was about deterring defendants.
Precisely. Preventing a chilling effect on defendants exercising their rights. They feared any increase after asserting a right could look like punishment.
So the core insight here...
While prosecutorial discretion is seen as essential for flexibility, it creates this continuous, complex balancing act, allowing prosecutors necessary latitude versus safeguarding individual rights against potential abuse. It's a tension playing out daily in courtrooms everywhere. Hashtag 3.3, the origins of elected prosecutors.
And speaking of prosecutors, it's worth taking a step back. How did the U.S. even come to elect prosecutors? It's a uniquely American thing.
It really is, and it ties directly into that public desire for accountability, for control over powerful officials.
Michael J. Ellis, in The Origins of the Elected Prosecutor, highlights this striking fact. The United States is the only country in the world where citizens elect local public prosecutors.
The only one. That's remarkable.
Isn't it? And this transition from appointed to elected status happened incredibly fast between 1832 and 1860 in nearly 3/4 of U.S. states. A real democratic wave.
What drove that wave?
Ellis explains it was largely these broad democratic impulses of the era. Jacksonian democracy, right? A widespread desire for more direct citizen control over government.
Trying to eliminate patronage appointments seen as corrupt. Increase responsiveness.
Exactly. And it wasn't just prosecutors. Lots of offices became elective, then judges, sheriffs. The sentiment was strong.
That delegate's quote about electing everyone but the dog catcher.
Right. And if the dogs could vote, we should have that as well. It shows the fervor for direct democracy.
But that impulse, however noble, came with its own concerns, its own challenges.
Definitely. Ellis notes that later commentators have observed that elections subject prosecutors to untoward political influences. Well, they might concentrate on high-profile cases for media coverage or align with political factions, potentially compromising impartial justice.
And the paradox is, this happened just as prosecutors were gaining more discretionary authority, moving from just ministerial roles to more powerful executive positions.
Exactly. More power and making them elected officials at the same time created this complex new dynamic. Trading one form of accountability, appointment, for another, election, with all its political baggage.
Were there any attempts to mitigate those political influences early on?
Yes, the article describes some early safeguards. New York adopted staggered 3-year terms for DAs to separate their elections from the governors, trying to reduce partisan ties.
And residency requirements were common too, weren't they?
Widespread. Ensuring prosecutors were an acquaintance in the county, cognizant of the facts attending a case. The idea was local knowledge and community ties would foster better judgment.
So what this history tells us is that the public, wanting direct control, opted for electoral accountability, even for specialized roles like prosecutors.
But that choice, while democratically empowering, simultaneously introduced new forms of political influence.
Creating a different set of accountability challenges that frankly persist today. The core insight is that accountability isn't static. Every solution can create new problems. It's a powerful lesson in unintended consequences and the ongoing struggle to define who controls powerful public servants.
Okay, so given all this complexity, discretion, the scale of government, that balancing act, how do we actually enforce accountability?
Beyond just hoping officials have a strong conscience.
Right. Our sources detail a range of structural mechanisms, many operating right within the executive branch itself, internal checks, you might say.
Designed to keep agencies and individuals on the straight and narrow.
Exactly. Our public management text describes several key tools. First up, whistleblower protections.
Laws like Lloyd La Follette back in 1912 and the Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989.
Right. Protecting federal employees who report misconduct, waste, fraud, abuse, critical internal institutions, empowering individuals to expose wrongdoing without fear of reprisal.
Leveraging that subjective responsibility, giving it legal backing.
Then second, and pretty significant, Inspector General IG offices.
Ah, the IGs. Created in '78 in many agencies, described as unusual creatures of the federal bureaucracy.
Unusual because their job is so expansive: audit, investigate, review, assess, analyze, evaluate. Basically, look into every problem or deficiency.
And they serve both masters, right? The president who appoints them, the Senate that confirms them, puts them in tricky spots.
Definitely. We see that tension clearly in the accountability tensions at the CIA text box in public management.
The conflict between Director Hayden and IG Helgerson. Hayden investigating his own watchdog.
Exactly. It vividly illustrates how important, yet often resented, IGs can be when they challenge power or operational priorities. That inherent friction between internal oversight and operational demands.
So beyond IGs.
There are other internal audits and advocacy offices, dedicated audit functions like the Special IG for Iraq Reconstruction, and advocacy or ombudsman services like the IRS Taxpayer Advocate Service.
Addressing constituent complaints, identifying systemic problems, an internal voice for citizens.
And let's not forget chief financial officers, CFOs.
The CFO Act of 1990, aimed at rigorous financial accountability.
Establishing leadership structures, long-range planning, and critically mandated audited financial statements. A big step to professionalize financial management across government.
Standardizing things, creating objective measures.
Finally, the huge one.
Yeah.
The Office of Management and Budget, OMB.
Centralized power right there in the executive office of the president.
OMB assists the president with the budget, evaluates agency programs, sets funding priorities. It includes the Office of Federal Financial Management and, importantly, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA.
OIRA reviews agency rulemaking, reports on costs and benefits to Congress, a powerful tool for central control and accountability across the executive branch, ensuring agencies align with presidential priorities.
What's striking here is this layered, almost redundant approach to accountability within the executive branch.
No single mechanism is seen as sufficient, and that CIA IG example is so telling. Even with structural protections, oversight effectiveness can be challenged by culture, leadership, conflicting mandates like security versus transparency.
So the core insight:
accountability is an ongoing dynamic process, not a static achievement. It's constantly being negotiated, sometimes fiercely resisted. That tension between operational freedom and internal scrutiny is a perennial challenge. Requires constant vigilance. Hashtag 4.2 legislative branch controls.
Okay, moving beyond the executive branch, the legislative branch, especially Congress, plays a truly crucial role in ensuring accountability.
Makes sense. Congress creates the agencies, funds them, sets their mandates. They have a vested interest and a constitutional duty.
Right. So public management outlines several powerful mechanisms Congress uses, like transparency laws.
FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. Federal Advisory Committee Act,
Working.
Government in the Sunshine Act.
All designed to make government operations and documents publicly accessible, mostly, opening up the black box to public scrutiny.
Allowing citizens, journalists, to act as external watchdogs. Pull those fire alarms.
Then there's classic committee oversight.
Hearings, investigations, drafting bills, authorizing agencies, appropriations committees controlling the purse strings annually.
Those hearings can be intense. Agency heads grilled on performance, compliance, very direct political and legal accountability.
We also see legislative design, right? That McNulgast idea.
Yes, political scientists suggesting that when legislatures create agencies, the enacting coalitions design accountability mechanisms right then.
To prevent bureaucratic drift agencies pursuing goals different from legislative intent. Building control into the agency's DNA.
And related to that is fire alarm oversight.
As opposed to constant police patrol monitoring, which is costly and maybe impractical.
Exactly. Legislators can shift monitoring to constituents through deck stacking, creating opportunities like advisory boards, public comment periods.
So stakeholders can observe and report deviations, leading to fire alarm oversight responses only happen when someone pulls the alarm.
The New York Times investigation into electrical failures in Iraq, triggering House hearings. Prime example of an external fire alarm.
Now, there's that fascinating historical debate about how effective this oversight really is, even in systems like Britain's.
Right. Herman Feiner strongly asserted the power of the British House of Commons. He argued it made the civil service truly responsive.
Listing historical successes, pressure on appeasement, removing ministers, controlling economic policy, Feiner believed when the Legislative Assembly asserts an opinion, it also asserts a command. Direct political control was key for him.
But Carl Friedrich, his counterpart in the debate, vehemently disagreed.
He argued parliamentary responsibility was largely inoperative and certainly ineffectual, called the majority a rubber stamp for the cabinet, especially around Munich.
Friedrich questioned how effectively legislatures could really permeate a highly technical, differentiated government service. He felt complexity just outstripped legislative capacity for direct control.
And public management also highlights the Government Accountability Office, GAO.
The legislative branch's watchdog. Crucially, its role has expanded from just financial audits to broader performance accountability.
No longer just scrutinizing spending, but evaluating if programs meet objectives and societal needs. A vital independent assessment for Congress.
This raises a big question for us. Is legislative oversight mostly about direct control, or more about creating conditions for others to trigger accountability?
Feiner and Friedrich present valid opposing views on the practical challenges. Feiner stresses ultimate authority. Friedrich highlights practical limits in a modern, specialized state.
The rise of fire alarm oversight suggests a pragmatic recognition that direct, continuous monitoring is often impractical.
And empowering external stakeholders is a necessary complement. The core insight. Legislative accountability is multifaceted, balancing direct oversight with indirect monitoring, constantly adapting to government scale and complexity. Hashtag 4.3 Judicial Branch Controls.
All right, finally, the third branch. The judicial branch provides another critical layer of accountability.
Often acting as a last resort, right? When other mechanisms fail or aren't enough.
Exactly. Their crucial role is ensuring agencies follow the rule of law and protect individual rights.
How do they do that?
Public management explains they monitor and impose accountability primarily through public law litigation.
Not just individual disputes, but cases where citizens or groups claim constitutional or statutory rights have been violated systemically.
Right. Think broad problems in children's services, prisons, environmental hazards, where agency actions or inactions are challenged.
And courts have powerful remedies in these cases.
Very powerful. They can issue injunctions, direct orders, telling an agency to act or stop acting in a certain way.
And more complex stuff, too.
Yes, affirmative relief or remedial decrees. These court orders seek to adjust future behavior, not to compensate for past wrong. They direct significant changes in agency structure or practice.
Like what kinds of changes?
Could be process remedies, like forming advisory committees, or performance standards, like mandating staffing levels, or even specified remedial actions, like school busing or fundamentally changing prison conditions.
And courts can appoint external agents to make sure these happen. Masters, monitors, receivers.
Yes. The example in the text of the California prison system being placed into receivership due to constitutional violations, citing understaffed hospitals, inadequate caregivers, it vividly illustrates the dramatic, often controversial power of the judiciary, essentially taking over management functions.
But there are limits to judicial control, right?
Yeah.
As Donald Horwitz noted, courts do not self-start.
Exactly. They depend entirely on private initiative. Someone has to bring a lawsuit. They're reactive, not proactive.
And the text also brings up judicial deference to agencies. The Chevron doctrine from 1984.
Right. Chevron v. Natural Resources Defense Council. It says if Congress spoke clearly, agencies must obey. But if Congress was silent or ambiguous,
Then an agency can adopt any reasonable interpretation, even if a court prefers another.
precisely. This gives agencies considerable flexibility, especially when political accountability mechanisms are also available. It reflects a recognition of agency expertise. Courts saying, you're the experts, your interpretation is reasonable, we won't second guess.
This raises that important question.
Hmm.
Where's the line between necessary judicial oversight and potential judicial overreach? Especially with those sweeping remedial decrees.
Like the California prison example.
Right. While essential for upholding rights and law, the judiciary's role sparks debates about separation of powers, about the technical expertise of judges versus administrators. Are judges qualified to run prisons or environmental policy?
Fair question.
The core insight is that the judiciary provides a vital check, but operates within limits, balancing correcting wrongs with respect for administrative expertise and the democratic legitimacy of other branches. It's a delicate, often controversial balance.
Okay, so we've talked about these structural mechanisms, executive, legislative, judicial. They provide the framework.
The architecture of accountability.
Right. But frameworks need information to function. How do we actually know if government is doing what it's supposed to and doing it well?
This brings us to performance measurement, getting the data.
And public management states it directly. Accountability compels some measure or appraisal of performance. It's seen as a key structural mechanism to enhance accountability.
Often imposed by external authorities, like GPRA, the Government Performance and Results Act, or executive initiatives like PART, mandating measurement.
But importantly, accountability isn't the only reason to measure performance. It's not always the main driver, even.
There are many other uses for performance data, right? Beyond just checking up on someone.
Yeah. The text lists Harry Hatry's 11 potential uses. Besides accountability, there's justifying budgets, allocating resources, motivating personnel, monitoring contractors, program evaluation, strategic planning, communicating with the public,
Building trust, setting priorities.
and maybe most importantly, helping provide services more effectively. So it's both an oversight tool and a crucial management tool for internal improvement.
Interestingly, Robert Ben's view, also in the text, explicitly doesn't list promoting accountability as a standalone purpose.
Why not?
Because accountability itself has so many different meanings. Instead, Ben focuses on 8 purposes, like evaluating, controlling, budgeting, motivating, promoting, celebrating, learning, and improving.
His point being that, depending on how you define accountability, measurement serves different functions, but accountability itself isn't one single purpose.
Exactly. It's too multifaceted. Are you measuring for control, for motivation, for evaluation? All fall under the umbrella, but they're distinct goals.
What's fascinating here is that performance measurement, which often seems like this technical objective thing,
Is actually deeply embedded in the political and organizational context of accountability. The purpose of measurement, why you're doing it, fundamentally determines what gets measured, how it's collected, and crucially, how it's used.
So this raises that important question for you, the listener, to always ask. Are we measuring to blame, to learn, or to improve?
The core insight is that the answer profoundly shapes the entire approach. If the goal is blame, you often get defensiveness, manipulation. If it's learning and improvement, it can be a powerful driver of positive change. Hashtag tag 5.2, what and whose performance is measured.
So if we're going to measure, whose performance are we looking at, and what kinds of things are we measuring?
Not always straightforward. Choosing the right metrics is critical.
Public management explains that public sector measurement usually focuses on the agency, project, or program level.
Though individual performance might be assessed too, but linking individual work to organizational outcomes isn't always clear.
Right. A police officer's arrest clearly linked to a department goal, but a budget officer's work. Vital, but how does it directly impact healthcare quality? Complicates the who's.
So what kinds of measures are typically collected? The text uses Des Moines as an example.
Yeah, it details the typical types needed for a broad picture, looking from different angles. First, inputs.
The resources used, staff hours, equipment, budget allocated, the stuff you put in.
Next, outputs. The amount of service delivered, the activity, number of clients trained, number of crimes reported, tangible, countable actions.
Then, outcomes. The actual results, the effectiveness, the desired societal impacts. Clients getting jobs, crime rates falling, citizen satisfaction. This is about impact.
We also look at efficiency or productivity, output or outcome achieved per input or cost, cost per participant, cost per solved case, getting the most bang for your buck.
There's also demographic workload characteristics, descriptions of who is served, gender, income, crime types, understanding the context.
And finally, impacts, the program's value added. What happened beyond what would have occurred anyway? Comparing to a control group, maybe? Seeing the true difference made.
So how do we choose the right measures from this menu? Public management points out no one performance measure will suit all circumstances.
Measuring effectiveness often requires focusing on quality, outcomes, comparing actual to desired goals.
The core insight is that selecting measures is itself an act of strategic judgment. We have to be incredibly careful not to inadvertently penalize organizations for factors outside their control, those attribution problems.
Like judging a job program during a recession solely on placement rates. Unfair.
Exactly. The choice of measure needs to reflect the program's true mission and context. Otherwise, assessments can be deeply unfair and misleading. Hashtag 5.3 Performance Measurement Initiatives and Challenges.
Okay, let's look at how these ideas play out in some high-profile initiatives and the very real challenges they face in practice.
Moving from theory to reality.
Public management discusses the Program Assessment Rating Tool, PART, a Bush administration initiative.
Ambitious effort. Surveyed managers on purpose, planning, management results, aimed to systematically assess effectiveness.
And crucially, link these evaluations directly to budget decisions, going beyond GPRA.
Did it work? Did good scores mean more money?
Well, analyses show PART scores did have a positive effect on funding. But political support for a program mattered more than PART evaluations in budget season.
Performance info can change the terms of debate, but it will not necessarily determine the ultimate decision. Political rationality wins out sometimes.
A clear illustration. Then the source turns to the No Child Left Behind Act, NCLB, major education reform, early 2000s.
Required states to set up accountability systems based on academic indicators for all students in all subgroups. That subgroup part was key.
And the PS 48 in the South Bronx example vividly illustrates the challenges.
What happened there?
Despite soaring overall test scores, 86% proficient in math, nearly 70% in English, near the top of its district, PS 48 was labeled failing under NCLB.
Failing. With scores like that, why?
Because its special ed and English language learner subgroups didn't make sufficient progress on English tests due to a complex, confusing web of rules.
Like arbitrary subgroup sizes, convoluted rules for immigrants, unrealistic expectations for special ed kids on grade-level tests.
Exactly. A bureaucratic nightmare for a successful school. The principal, John Hughes, had to fight for months just to get clarity, adjust the lists.
Did he succeed?
Eventually, yes. He demonstrated the failing label was a product of flawed measurement rules, not poor performance. And despite the label, not one parent removed a child.
A profound disconnect between official measures and community perception. The numbers didn't tell the whole story.
Really highlights that performance paradox where measures can mislead or create perverse incentives.
Public management lists several critical challenges in performance measurement that come up again and again.
Like what to measure. Outputs are easier than outcomes, but do they reflect effectiveness? High arrests, output, but crime rates don't fall, outcome.
Time horizon. Do short-term measures align with long-term goals? Environmental programs, research, annual metrics can be misleading.
Attribution problems, accounting for factors outside control. The economy tanks, the jobs program looks bad. Hard to isolate true impact.
Incentives, leading to cream skimming, selecting easy clients, or suppression of information. That Houston schools example, undercounting dropouts. Stark warning.
Performance paradoxes. Measures lose potency. Managing to the test, grade inflation, focusing only on monitor dimensions may be hurting equity. You get what you measure.
Political rationality. Info used for political purposes, agendas, bases, re-election, not just technical effectiveness. Beryl Rady's critique about naive assumptions that info is neutral or clearly linked to cause-effect. Ideology and interests matter.
And finally, socially constructed effectiveness. Renee Anspach's research showing effectiveness is interpreted differently by different stakeholders, sometimes scaling goals or relying on the appearance of involvement to maintain faith even in failing programs. Perception matters.
This raises that huge question: how can we design performance systems that genuinely improve services and foster accountability without creating these unintended negative consequences or being manipulated?
The PS48 NCLB story is such a powerful, almost tragic example. Technical rules punishing success, frustrating those on the front lines.
The core insight has to be that effective measurement requires not just good data, but flexibility, common sense, and a deep understanding of context. Balancing objective data with the nuanced reality of human services. It's a constant struggle.
Okay, so our deep dive has shown pretty clearly that accountability isn't just about formal rules, structures, legal mandates, no matter how intricate they are.
There's more to it than just the org chart or the regulations.
Right. It's also profoundly shaped by the human element, the shared values, beliefs, norms within an organization, what the text calls the cultural dimension.
How people actually operate, what they believe is important.
Public management emphasizes this plays an incredibly important role. For instance, creating a performance culture focused on data, maybe high compensation, a competitive spirit that can influence behavior at all levels.
And research supports a link, right, between organizational culture, involvement, consistency, adaptability, mission, and actual performance.
It does. How people feel about their work and their organization drives engagement, not just the rules.
This takes us right back to Musher's subjective responsibility.
Yes. Public management highlights that objective responsibility, formal answerability through structures, is necessary but insufficient.
There's also that moral obligation on the individual to answer for, honestly and openly, his or her decisions and actions.
That inner check of individual values, ethics, motives, crucial for responsible action or understanding lapses in judgment. It's the moral compass guiding discretion when the rule book is silent or ambiguous.
The source also discusses the powerful role of professional norms and standards.
Right. Professionals like attorneys, doctors, teachers, they develop unique norms through training, shared experiences.
And that Bremen Gates research, working, shirking, and sabotage, found control over bureaucrats is often less about coercion from bosses.
And more about their functional and solidary preferences, their positive views toward their work and colleagues.
Exactly. Which underscores the critical importance of the hiring process. Selecting employees who are inherently committed, responsible, who want to do good work because it aligns with their professional identity.
Public management also delves into William Ochi's concept of clan-like organizations,
where behavior or outputs are hard to measure precisely.
Yeah. In those environments, they rely heavily on carefully selected workers, reinforced by rituals and ceremonies, rewarding desired attitudes and values.
Like the principal agents described in the text box. Leaders relying on constant readings of whether the community is thriving, rather than strict accountability metrics.
Exactly. A system built on trust, shared values, mutual understanding. Culture becomes the primary accountability mechanism.
What's truly fascinating here is how profoundly culture and individual values contribute, filling the gaps where formal structures can't reach or aren't enough.
Fostering an environment where people want to do the right thing, believe in the mission, not just comply because they have to.
And that intrinsic motivation, as Tummers and Bekkers showed with Discretion, influences their willingness to implement policies meaningfully. The core insight. When people feel purpose and shared values, they're more likely to exercise discretion responsibly, even when no one's explicitly watching. True accountability is holistic, demanding attention to the human spirit as much as the rule book. Hashtag 6.2, the craft dimension.
So beyond structures and cultures, public managers also actively shape accountability through their individual practice, their judgment, what the text calls craft.
The art of management itself. Not just following rules, but making choices in complex, ambiguous situations.
Right. Public management explains that managers, through their craft, exert significant influence over accountability relationships. Even when facing explicit requirements, they still have discretion in how they respond, interpret, implement.
They're not just passive recipients of mandates, they're active players.
The source gives that great example from Beryl Radin on federal agencies' varied responses to GPRA, the Performance Act.
She saw several approaches.
Yeah. Some did rigorous, honest planning. Others adopted a narrow compliance strategy, just repackaging old work to look like they met requirements. Some used it to advance their own agendas. Others focused only on internal management.
That wide variation shows how managers actively shape responses through their craft, sometimes subverting the spirit of the law or creatively using it.
And public management notes managers can even generate their own accountability requirements as a tool for managing subordinates, creating internal control systems.
This speaks to a manager's managerial responsibility, that need for reasonable judgment informed by professionalism and the public interest.
Bertelli and Lynn argue it's improper for a court to impose additional structural constraints on a responsibly managed agency, right? Because it shifts accountability away from political branches and the manager's own judgment.
They're making a case for trusting the manager's craft in a sense.
So this raises an important question. How do we empower managers to use their craft creatively, effectively?
Without allowing them to subvert genuine oversight or manipulate systems.
Exactly. The core insight here is that management is as much art as science. The choices individual leaders make profoundly impact how accountability is achieved.
It's about cultivating judgment, experience, ethics, alongside technical skills. The craft dimension reminds us the human element, the individual's capacity to lead and interpret, is indispensable and often unpredictable in the accountability equation.
Can't just rely on structures, need to rely on the people in them and their responsible navigation. Hashtag 6.3, navigating multiple accountability demands. So what happens when all these forces collide? Structural rules, cultural norms, individual craft, conflicting stakeholder demands.
Public managers often find themselves under intense cross pressures from multiple accountability regimes, pulled in different directions simultaneously, constant dilemmas.
Public management describes managers operating in environments defined by rule of law, interest-based politics, separated powers, diverse cultures. This inevitably creates conflicting expectations.
Efficiency demands clashing with equity concerns, professional judgment versus strict rules, forcing difficult trade-offs.
And the source cites Romchek and Dubnik again, outlining 4 ways managers might respond to these multiple demands.
How they cope.
They could be passive, not trying to manage expectations, just subject to the whims of political fortune, hoping for the best.
Letting external forces dictate.
They could be reactive, dealing with consequences only as they arise, responding after problems manifest. A wait-and-see approach.
Putting out fires.
They could be adaptive, proactively assessing situations, taking anticipatory steps to minimize costly consequences, more forward-thinking.
Trying to get ahead of problems.
Or they could be strategic, actively managing the external environment to shape, direct, even control emerging accountability dilemmas, consciously influencing outcomes, maybe deflecting scrutiny.
Playing the game proactively.
Public management illustrates these with the analysis of the tragic Ron Brown plane crash.
What was the conclusion there?
That while the institutional rhetoric around Secretary Brown encouraged entrepreneurial management, implying discretion, responsiveness, when the crash happened and investigations began,
officials were judged by whether they had obeyed commands, a hierarchical standard, rather than whether their decisions reflected reasonable exercises of their discretion, a professional standard.
Exactly. A stark default to hierarchical accountability when things go wrong, despite culture and craft leaning towards flexibility beforehand. When crisis hits, the rulebook takes over.
We also saw a similar tension, maybe more political, in the CIA Inspector General example.
The push for aggressive national security ops, using discretion, and end achiever mindset.
Clashing directly with the IG's role enforcing rules, upholding constraints, legal and bureaucratic accountability.
The article highlights how distaste for Helgerson ran highest in the agency's National Clandestine Service, who valued operational freedom over internal investigations.
And the potential chilling effect on whistleblowers if an IG's independence is undermined shows how crucial culture is for supporting structural mechanisms, especially when stakes are high.
This raises that constant, difficult question for administrators and policymakers. How do we design systems that articulate different accountability forms and clearly define which takes precedence when? How do we balance them when they conflict?
The core insight seems to be there's often an accountability bias. Certain forms, like strict hierarchical or legal compliance, get prioritized, especially after a failure.
Even if other forms, like professional judgment or responsiveness, were encouraged before.
Exactly. It makes managing public organizations deeply complex, often paradoxical, demanding constant discernment, ethical grounding, strategic thinking in this dynamic environment of competing demands. A true test of leadership. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow, okay. That was quite a deep dive into administrative responsibility, policy development, accountability, implementation.
We covered a lot of ground, from definitions to history.
Yeah, we started defining accountability and responsibility, contrasting external control with internal conscience. Explored the history, how things evolved from direct oversight to complex bureaucracy.
We unpack those powerful frameworks from Romsek and Dubnik and Judith Gruber, invaluable mental models for categorizing accountability types: bureaucratic, legal, professional, political.
Your secret weapon for diagnosing accountability challenges. And we definitely didn't shy away from the tricky bits. Discretion essential for client-centered service, as Tummers and Bekkers showed.
But also a potential minefield, whether in prosecutorial decisions like Goodwin, where timing raises questions of vindictiveness,
Or the historical shift to elected prosecutors, as Michael Ellis detailed, bringing new political influences.
Then we spent considerable time on the structural safeguards, IGs, OMB, GAO, legislative oversight, the judiciary's role, seeing how intricate they are, how they interact, sometimes with real tension, like that CIA example.
And performance measurement, from part to no child left behind, understanding why we measure what we measure.
And those very real challenges, like the PS-48 story, a successful school labeled failing by flawed metrics, when numbers don't tell the whole story or create perverse incentives.
Finally, we stepped beyond structures to explore the crucial roles of organizational culture, individual values, managerial craft, a powerful reminder that even the best systems rely on the human element.
The ethics, judgment, motivation of public servants navigating these complex demands daily.
So what does this all mean for you thinking about public policy and management? It means effective, accountable public service isn't just about following rules or hitting targets.
It's about navigating a constantly shifting landscape of expectations, principles, practicalities.
Understanding those deep historical tensions, the multifaceted nature of accountability, and then figuring out how to foster environments where discretion leads to public good without sacrificing trust or democratic control.
It's an ongoing, vital challenge. Requires knowledge, but also wisdom and a strong ethical compass.
To deliver effectively and responsibly.
Consider this as a final thought to mull over. In a world of increasing complexity and specialization, where problems demand flexible, expert solutions, how can we best cultivate both the external mechanisms and that internal inner check?
To ensure public servants, from the top executive to the street-level bureaucrat, truly acts consistently and ethically in the public interest.
What balance would you strike between rigid rules and individual discretion? And how would you build a system that supports that balance even when demands conflict?